All right, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this week's Colloquium, Stats Week Colloquium on Statistical Sciences. Okay, so how is everyone doing so far? I hope we're all ready for our speaker for today. Okay, so before I formally begin our colloquium for today, let us read or go through some of the guidelines for a smooth flow. Okay, so the first one, the audience are requested to reserve their questions for the Q&A forum at the end of our presentation. The audience are also enjoined to use the raise hand feature of the Zoom to facilitate the Q&A forum in an orderly manner. Or you may also use the chat feature of Zoom to relay your questions. So you may send your questions to everyone, or you may also send them to me privately. When asking the questions, we're also requesting everyone to use the following format. So please state your name, the university, institution, or agency that you're affiliated with, and your question for our speaker. Okay, so before we begin, can we get any kind of reacts just to show that we are ready? All right. Okay, thank you so much. So with that, allow me to introduce our speaker for today. Engineer 𝗕𝗶𝗶𝗿 Bilon is a licensed professional working on HIV and LGBTQI data and statistics. Currently, he teaches statistics as a full-time assistant professor at UP Diliman, from which he obtained his Master of Science in Statistics and Bachelor of Science in Electronics and Communications Engineering. He has been a licensed engineer in the Philippines since 2018. Prior to joining the faculty of the UP School of Statistics, he served as the National Consultant on HIV and LGBTI of the United Nations Development Program in the Philippines. He has also been formally engaged by various government and non-government institutions, such as the Commission on Human Rights of the Philippines and the civil society organizations working on LGBTQI and human rights issues. He has been involved in various research and development projects. As of 2022, he has raised and managed almost $500,000 for research and development projects on HIV and LGBTQI. His research works have been published in several statistics journals, and his research direction is on computational statistics, social research methodologies, and applied social statistics, with focus on digital data and data on gender, sexuality, and human rights. Ladies and gentlemen, let's give a warm round of clap reacts for our speaker, Engineer 𝗕𝗶𝗶𝗿.
Thank you so much, Bea, for introducing me. So I'll just share my slides. Okay. Sige, thank you again, Bea, and good afternoon, everyone. So today I'll be presenting our research entitled Capacitating Communities for Change, a national baseline study on community-led monitoring for HIV in the Philippines. So when doing this work, there were actually 3 questions of interest. So first, how can community members surface their experiences for the improvement of the services they receive? Second, how can they better advocate for change? And lastly, what support do our communities need? So as researchers, an important question for us is actually how do we answer these questions? So today, I'll focus on sharing how us researchers have dealt with some of the methodological challenges we encountered. And I'll illustrate how the methods we employed were able to address these concerns and actually helped us in doing better research. So I'll begin with the introduction. I'll try to introduce you to community-led monitoring and then give you the context here in the Philippines regarding community-led monitoring. And then I'll talk about the present study. And then I'll go through the methodology we employed for this study. First, by giving you the overview, and then I'll talk about the details of the key informant interviews, the survey, and the validation workshop that we did. And then I'll share some highlights of our results, and I'll try to focus as well on the decisions that we made as researchers as we went along our study. And then I'll give you a short discussion of the results. And then lastly, I'll end the presentation with the conclusion and methodological reflections I had for this study. So before anything else, I'd like to thank my colleagues from UP Department of Psychology for working with me on this research. So I think they're here. So una, maraming salamat kay Dr. Jose Antonio Clemente. Nandito rin si Dr. Simon Briez and si Ana Marita Magpayong-Niklat. So thank you so much for being part of this research. So this study is actually commissioned by TLF Share Collective through Babaylanes, and the project is supported by the Joint United Nations Program on HIV and AIDS, the US President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, and the United States Agency for International Development. Okay, so to evaluate the effectiveness of local or national HIV responses, the traditional approach has been to conduct program evaluation as implemented by its managers, particularly para ma-assess yung service quality and delivery. However, because these approaches tend to focus on the perspectives of program implementers, such evaluations actually tend to underrepresent the experiences of the target communities and key populations who are actually the focus of these interventions in the first place. So as a consequence, evaluations undertaken by program funders and decision makers can inadvertently omit information na nagre-reflect ng outcomes, barriers, priorities, and consequences that the communities experience through their uptake of the program. So in response to this, CLM can be actually employed to complement traditional monitoring and evaluation, and also to empower recipient populations by providing them an accountability and advocacy platform toward interventions that more effectively, efficiently, and transparently respond doon sa kanilang mga pangangailangan. Essentially, CLM is a set of tools, processes, and competencies that enables the use of routinely collected data in evaluating service quality, monitoring, fulfillment of response targets, and pag-negotiate na rin ng interventions with various stakeholders. So, adopting the CLM framework of the UNAIDS, we see here that the CLM begins with establishing a CLM system by first identifying the needs of communities, pati na rin yung gaps sa existing services and programs. So this one is the stage 0. So this continues in a cycle of collecting, analyzing, and interpreting, and disseminating information, as well as advocating for solutions and monitoring for changes. Although CLM is not new, since target populations and communities have long participated in governmental and institutional HIV responses and evaluation, several researchers have noted that attempts at organizing and adopting CLM systems have been relatively slow internationally. At dahil ito sa several barriers against sufficient human, financial, and political capital that need to be addressed to achieve a functioning CLM. So although issues such as lack of funding and government support are indeed barriers to the functioning and even the establishment or formation of a CLM system, cases such as those of the Philippines, where government and allied institutions actually face problems in conducting routine M&E, demonstrate the gaps that CLM can actually help to resolve. So in our context, the UNAIDS framework can be deemed applicable or at least not incompatible with, because this framework actually allows or only lays down the guiding definitions and principles that will allow for a common understanding of CLM. And we also found that it does not pose any issue of social, political, or cultural inappropriateness when applied dito sa ating bansa. So that's why we decided to adopt this framework for our study. A more crucial concern actually is whether there are sufficient resources and acceptance for CLM systems to be established, maintained, and acknowledged. So taking off from the initial efforts and discussions of community organizations working on HIV in the Philippines, this study aims to address two objectives. So first is to establish and populate an inventory system of community-based and community-led organizations working on HIV and HIV key populations. and then identify the learning and development needs among the community organizations in relation to their capabilities, access, integration, and utilization of a community-led monitoring system. So para masagot itong mga tanong na ito, so these are actually big questions. So to be able to answer these questions, we employed a multiphasic mixed methods design where quantitative and qualitative data were collected, analyzed, and triangulated to respond to our objectives. So the research began with a review of the literature related to HIV frameworks and policies, particularly yung tungkol doon sa ating community-led monitoring. So the general skills, knowledge, and resource needs identified, then informed yung mga susunod na phases ng aming study. The second phase used key informant interviews or KAIs with HIV coordinating organizations and networks to identify more specific CLM needs and expectations as situated in local context and realities. So afterwards, the themes we derived from the literature and KAIs were transformed into a self-assessment learning and development tool. So we also validated the tool through cognitive interviews and consultation with key partners. And then the tool was distributed to HIV community organizations to identify their current needs, capabilities, perceptions, and experiences. And then finally, the results of these phases were presented to organizations for validation, refinement, and enrichment of the survey reports. So I'll try to go into details regarding the different phases. For the key informant interviews, we actually conducted 6 KAIs, each one with a representative from an organization that is a key stakeholder in the national HIV program. So using what we know from the literature, we constructed an initial interview guide which highlighted the prospective interviewee organizations, knowledge, skills, and experience about CLM. So the KAIs themselves followed a semi-structured interview guide, and it has 3 major sections: the organizational profile, and then the monitoring experiences, or how they evaluate the quality and effectiveness of their services and their understanding of monitoring and research. And lastly, the knowledge of and attitudes toward CLM, which included questions on whether they have activities that involve community consultation, service quality, effectiveness, feedback, and incident reporting, among many others. So each interview closed by asking interviewees about their organization's planned projects and activities, pati na rin yung ibang topics or questions that they want to raise. For the analysis, we employed thematic analysis on the interview responses, and then the themes we got were reviewed for consistency and relevance to the goals of the study. These themes were then checked against extant literature to ensure consistency and with existing studies on CLM. And then the themes were translated into an initial item pool. Okay, for the survey, we sent an invitation letter with the survey link attached to organizations involved in HIV response or related advocacy in the Philippines. And the organizations were identified through consultations with the project team. So we identified 158 organizations, so we invited all of them to participate, and 72 or 46% eventually completed the survey. The survey questions were drafted using the needs identified from the KAIs and the literature review, and the instrument was then revised through consultations, and prior to distribution, cognitive interviews were conducted where the full survey was given to representatives of 2 community organizations for them to answer while taking note of their thought process and opinions about the items. So their comments, we use them to clarify items and response options to improve clarity, level of detail, and wording of the response options. And then finally, during data collection, we set up a Facebook page para yung mga participants, they have another platform in which they can easily ask questions or clarifications while answering the survey. The survey was distributed to all identified community organizations working on HIV. And to ensure that all participants received the invitation, follow-up was done via email, mobile or landline, and or social media accounts such as Facebook page noong mga organizations. Okay, so the survey actually ran from 4 to 31 of July this year. So before we proceeded with the survey proper, participants were informed, were provided an informed consent. And then after, participants were asked about their needs and capabilities in 3 parts. So first part ay tungkol sa kanilang organization, and then second part ay patungkol sa systems and tools for CLM, and then the last part is about CLM needs and capabilities. So summary statistics were obtained from the survey data. And then we also measured the association between regularity of gathering feedback on HIV services and programs and several factors supporting CLM. So we used Spearman's rank correlation coefficient to measure the associations. And then summary statistics on training needs supporting CLM was disaggregated by location and size in terms of number of regular staff members of the organization. For the validation workshop, we invited 25 representatives from 17 community organizations working on HIV, and participants actually came from Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao. So in addition to ensuring trustworthiness of the interpretation of the results, the workshop had 3 goals. First is to present the results of the study to workshop participants. Second, to gather feedback on the interpretation of the survey results. And lastly, to surface additional needs, concerns, and questions of participants regarding CLM. So the workshop, for the workshop that we did, it consisted primarily of inputs from researchers, plenary sessions, breakout discussions, with some activities in between. The workshop lasted for 3.5 hours, and it was divided into 3 parts. So the first part talked about the organizational profile and systems and tools supporting CLM. Second part, knowledge, attitudes, and values supporting CLM. And then the last part talked about equipment, infrastructures, and tools supporting CLM. So I'll share with you some of the results just to point out some of the methodological challenges and decisions that we did as researchers. Sige, I'll start with the key informant interviews. So the goal of the KAIs was to generate an initial pool of items that would comprise the baseline CLM needs and capabilities survey. So the qualitative phase was conducted to ensure that the survey items reflected the experiences, knowledge, attitudes, and skills of prospective participants that come from various regions of the country. So regarding the monitoring experiences, our general impression based on the interviews is that all 6 organizations have a broad understanding of the monitoring and evaluation, or M&E process, and the value of conducting this process to improve HIV response services. However, the capability to conduct structured, systematic, and routine monitoring, whether internally or monitoring their own services and programs, or externally, the services or programs of other organizations, it seems uneven across organizations. Thus, we decided to include in the survey items on whether organizations gather feedback on HIV services. And also take note that instead of using the term monitoring, we opted for a broader term, gathering feedback, to account for both formal and informal monitoring mechanisms of the organizations. We also anticipated that there would be organizations who do not gather feedback based on our interviews, which is why we deemed it important to include in the survey an open-ended item on why such feedback mechanisms are not yet in place. We also developed items that focus on whether feedback was gathered routinely and systematically, which are hallmarks of good monitoring systems. Now, regarding knowledge, attitudes, and needs supporting CLM, this section actually sought to gather information on the participants' lay understanding of CLM and their organizational needs to ensure that CLM will be implemented. For us, the important takeaway from the interviews is that all participants seem to have a general or broad idea of what CLM is about, but their knowledge is quote-unquote not as deep as they would like. So similar to their monitoring experiences, their grasp of CLM is uneven. So perhaps due to the nature of their work, one organization acknowledged that their main project is a form of CLM. So the respondent from this organization actually explained to us that in CLM, community, quote, community mismo galing ang issues as opposed to galing sa government, end quote. The community also identifies solutions to the needs, and the community is part of the monitoring. We stress that based on the interviews, all organizations have heard about it, but for the most part, their knowledge of the entire process is limited. So merong ilang questions raised during the interview, tulad ng ano ba ang mabibigay nito, or a confusion on whether CLM is a module or not. Nonetheless, all of these responses, all of these organizations actually recognize that it is important, necessary, and that they are willing to learn more and take it on. So this quote is telling, sabi ng isang participant doon sa KAI, kailangan talaga siya, watchdog ang community. Thus, in developing the baseline survey, we aim to provide data on not just awareness of CLM, but actually their lay perceptions of this process and what it entails. And finally, the interviews aimed to surface initial CLM needs in order to come up with a tentative initial list of survey items that may be used by the organizations for their self-assessment. We culled and developed 10 themes from the 6 interviews that seem to capture these needs. And these themes were also aligned with the CLM needs and capabilities from extant literature, such as data and physical infrastructures, human resources, knowledge, skills, and training needs, funding for CLM activities, representation, among others. Now, for the survey, we actually aimed to identify the needs and capabilities of community-led and community-based organizations that support the conduct of CLM for HIV in the Philippines in this part. So this quantitative phase was done to ensure that a bird's eye view snapshot of realities on the ground regarding CLM is captured in the study. So the sample analyzed consisted of responses from 72 community organizations working on HIV. Okay, for the organizational profile, around 4 in 10 of the participating organizations were based in Metro Manila. Around a third were based in Visayas or Mindanao, while around a quarter were based in Luzon. In terms of the number of volunteers, and members, majority of the organizations were large with 50 or more members and volunteers. But on the other hand, in terms of the number of regular staff members, 29% of the organizations were small, while around half were medium-sized or 5 to 19 regular staff members. Regarding the kinds of work done by the organizations, most of the organizations reported that they did education and training, and more than half said that education and training was one of the kinds of work they primarily did among those who said they do education and training. And additionally, around 3/4 of the organization said that they did community mobilization, communication campaigns, risk reduction programs such as condom use promotion, policy advocacy and lobbying, as well as voluntary counseling and testing for HIV. And we also found here among the organizations that only a few of them actually did other medical-related services or antiretroviral therapy, which is the treatment for HIV, or few of them also did research. More than 2/3 of the organization said they cater to people living with HIV and men who have sex with men, while around half said they cater to transgender people. So in this study, we looked at 6 areas for this survey. First, systems and tools. Second is knowledge and attitudes. Third, equipment and infrastructures. Then fourth, skills. Fifth, partnerships. And lastly, training needs and capabilities. Medyo marami sila. So hindi ko i-share everything, but I'll be sharing with you some of the results that we found that actually highlight some methodological insights we had from the study. Sige, regarding systems supporting community-led monitoring, many organizations already have experience in gathering feedback, such as comments, experiences, suggestions, and questions patungkol sa quality ng HIV services na natatanggap nila. In fact, around 78% said they have experience in gathering feedback. So among those who had experience in gathering feedback, around 88% said that they gather general comments on service quality, while around 77% said that they gather suggestions on how to improve service. We further asked the participants how they gathered the different kinds of feedback. Now, in terms of regularity of gathering feedback, out of the 72 participating organizations, 22% said they do not gather feedback on HIV services and programs, while 46% said they only gather feedback when needed. And around a third said they gather feedback regularly. Organizations highlighted several reasons kung bakit hindi sila nakakapag-gather ng HIV-related feedback regularly. At ilan sa mga reasons na binigay nila ay lack of financial and human resources needed to implement periodic monitoring. So this is actually something we explored further in our validation workshop. Now, regarding knowledge and attitude supporting community-led monitoring, mahalaga din bukod doon sa mga systems and tools na merong certain knowledge and attitudes yung community organizations that facilitate successful implementation of CLM. So in our results, we observed that many of the organizations aware of CLM believe that community-led monitoring should not be independent from government institutions. So this is this one. And similarly, most of the organizations believe that concerned funding agencies should first approve their community-led monitoring activities before they conduct them. So this is this one. And this is the 50% mark. Yeah. So as community-led monitoring is primarily a political, financial, and structural accountability mechanism, an effective CLM necessitates autonomy and independence from government institutions who are actually major HIV service providers here in the Philippines and from funding institutions. So this is something interesting, or siguro hindi siya masyadong umaakma doon sa alam natin from the literature. So this is something we explored further in our validation workshop. For equipment and infrastructures, the organizations were asked how satisfied they were with the different equipment and infrastructures that support CLM. And in addition to determining what proportion of organizations need improvement or lack specific equipment or infrastructure, we also measured the association between the regularity of gathering feedback and each equipment or infrastructure. Ginawa namin ito para lang din matulungan yung mga organizations to decide among themselves kung ano yung sa tingin nilang kailangang i-prioritize ng mga pangangailangan. Kasi medyo marami ito, just one part lang ito. Meron pa yung skills, meron pa yung partnerships, meron pa yung training needs, and so on. So marami talagang kailangan. So we measured the association between regularity of gathering feedback and each of these items para lang din matulungan silang mag-decide kung ano yung magandang i-prioritize. Sige, in particular, among the infrastructures and equipment supporting CLM that were deemed unavailable or not meeting the expectations of at least 30% of the participating organizations, we found several to be positively associated with more regular gathering of feedback. So kasama dito yung pagkakaroon ng office space, desktop computers or laptops in the office, internet access in the office, pagkakaroon ng financial or budget plan, particularly for CLM, internal monitoring apps or platforms, and external monitoring apps or platforms, and then monitoring dashboard. Okay, so ginawa rin namin ito for the skills and the partnership. So yung ilan dito nakita namin na positively associated with regularity of gathering feedback. Kunyari for this one, office space. So yung mga merong office space or mas satisfied sa kanilang office spaces ay mas regular na mukhang mas regular na nakakuha ng feedback. So we did the same thing for skills and partnerships. And now for the training needs and capabilities supporting CLM, we also asked the organizations about the trainings that they think they need to be able to conduct CLM. So we provided them with a list of skills related to CLM, and we asked them to choose 3 skills that they believe are the strengths and another 3 that they believe are the needs of their organizations. So this is to identify common needs among organizations. We also disaggregated them, the needs by location of the organizations and by the size of the organizations to know whether such needs are consistent across areas and sizes of the organizations. May ilan kaming napansing differences by disaggregating the needs. For example, sa Metro Manila, at a need identified by at least 30% of the organizations, but not in the other regions, was the training on using and appreciating data. So this one. And in Luzon, 2 training needs were identified, nalampas sa 30% mark. Ito ay conducting research in the community, this one, and successfully managing a project. Sa Visayas and Mindanao, planning and successfully implementing budget proposals, yung lampas sa 30% mark na hindi lampas sa Metro Manila and Luzon. So, in-explore namin ito further sa validation workshop. Sige, now let's talk about some of the results from the validation workshop. The validation workshop was actually conducted in order to ensure the trustworthiness ng aming interpretation ng ilan sa survey results base sa feedback provided by the participants. In addition, some of the trends of the survey results necessitated additional context based on the participants' experience that only they could provide. Thus, yung aming workshop allowed us to gain more confidence regarding what the results suggest and helped us in making sense of trends that needed more explanation. So dito sa section na to, we highlighted the major themes that emerged sa 4 na areas. So una, types of monitoring and evaluation, difficulty in using existing platforms and tools, lay beliefs about and understanding of CLM, and the variation in CLM needs when the results are disaggregated. So hindi ko pag-uusapan lahat to, just share some, particularly sa number 3 and number 4. So part ng aming validation workshop ay ma-unpack yung answer ng mga participants natin tungkol sa how they make sense of CLM. So to do this, participants were first asked to indicate on a meta card the first word or idea that comes to their mind when they hear community-led monitoring. So as a cursory analysis of the responses, we grouped similar responses together and formulated a process model that aims to capture the collective representation of the participants when it comes to CLM. And this was actually concurred to by the participants. So we noted that CLM stems from a need to translate or convert the voices of the community as signified by the community's experience, comments, and honest and direct feedback into data or evidence that can be gathered, processed, and analyzed. So to a certain extent, the participants' collective representation of CLM suggests what we earlier mentioned as a functional understanding of the process. It is consistent with the goal of CLM as a strategic information system that actually transforms community feedback into findings and eventually toward actionable insights. So during group discussions, a group was also asked to help us make sense of the result that for some organizations, CLM is not independent from government agencies, which is contrary to how CLM is described in the literature. So the group actually mentioned that there is a need to unpack what approval means. Will it be in the form of endorsement or policy? Kasi the group actually believed that CLM needs to be legitimized somehow and the government policy or city ordinance may help in this regard. So sabi ng participant, maganda siya malagay sa city ordinance sa amin. Nalagay namin na part ng monitoring na kasama ng CSOs. Nalagay na namin siya ngayon na kasama dapat ng CSO sa monitoring sa HIV program of the city. So the goal is actually not to get approval from the government, but to ensure that the process is formally recognized. Additionally, when CLM is seen as a legitimate activity by the government, there is a higher chance that the funds will be allocated for this purpose. So consistent naman ito doon sa stage 0 of UNAIDS CLM framework, which actually establishes background process, such as securing the cooperation and commitment of relevant stakeholders. Now, for the different regions and the different needs that we saw in the survey, tinanong din namin ito sa validation workshop. And participants shared that Metro Manila-based organizations have more access to resources and opportunities. Thus, the needs of organizations based in Visayas and Mindanao are quote-unquote more basic. According to one participant, sabi niya, mas madalas na mas mabilis mag-access ang mga taga-Manila. Mas maraming resources, mas konti ang needs sa CLM. Pinag-usapan na rin daw ito sa PNAC nung inamend yung RA 8504 or yung old HIV law ng Philippines. Nilaban na magkaroon ng community representatives na 2 sa council. Di lang sa Manila dapat nakakalimutan at di nadadala ang concerns ng taga Di Manila. Depende pa yan sa targets ng funders. Andito kasi sa Manila ang mga opportunities. So this discussion actually intimated that there is no one-size-fits-all intervention to address CLM needs. So sabi ng isang participant during the workshop, meron kaming frustrations, merong mga pagkukulang, pero baka siguro one-size-fits-all na intervention. Di talaga angkop sa kung anong needs ng community. Ilan na nga kami sa Cebu at Mindanao, nakikita natin sa sample na magkasama na sila, even may high burden areas or areas in Visayas and Mindanao with high HIV prevalence, pero di nabibigyan ng pansin. So based on these results, we found that several barriers confront community organizations working on HIV to be able to implement and establish community-led monitoring here in the Philippines. So these include factors related to systems and tools, knowledge and attitudes, equipment and infrastructures, skills, partnerships, all of which support the establishment of a functioning and genuine community-led monitoring. So una, although many organizations have experience in conducting traditional M&E, they lack the requisite systems and tools that can support the administrative demands of a CLM system. Kasama na dito yung research and program management capabilities, financial and human resources, pati na rin yung mga CLM-specific tools that they can use. When it comes to knowledge and attitudes towards CLM, we found it to be unequal across regions, with organizations outside Metro Manila requiring greater training on the fundamentals and basic implementation of CLM. Additionally, dependence on external institutions becomes necessary since these agencies provide information and resources that afford CLM systems in the first place. So in response, organizations can actually gain so much from being trained on the basics of CLM and also fostering dialogues with communities, government, and funding agencies to promote independence and clarify the goals and expectations of CLM, as well as diversifying the sources of funds to promote the autonomy of CLM systems. Third, organizations differ in the extent to which their equipment and infrastructures can support a full-fledged CLM. Kaya sufficient funding must be allocated to support the procurement of these needed resources. Fourth, organizations need skill and capability building opportunities that will allow them to take on and maintain the full scope of CLM activities. Kasama na dito yung paralegal training, which might increase their knowledge on about their rights and about HIV-related policies, as well as research and project skills. Fifth, partnerships need to be developed to increase access to funds and provide opportunities for the organizations to continuously improve their CLM programs. And finally, training needs that cut across issues identified above depend on the organization's, may depend on the organization's location and size. So just to end my presentation, I'll share our conclusion and some methodological reflections. So in this study, we found that community-led monitoring, or CLM, offers an alternative way of evaluating the effectiveness of HIV responses that is undertaken by the community members themselves. So CLM not only foregrounds yung experiences ng communities that focus on services and programs, but also empowers the recipient populations by providing accountability and advocacy platform. So to aid in the establishment of the Philippine CLM system, for this study, we established a baseline inventory system and we identified the learning and development needs of community organizations. So this study foregrounds that barriers that confront community organizations working on HIV hinder them from fully and genuinely establishing a CLM system in the country. And by meeting these needs, community organizations would become better equipped to undertake CLM activities. And ultimately, the established CLM system can empower communities to advocate for reduced inequalities, better representation, and sustained improvement in the country's HIV response. So some reflections lang doon sa study na ginawa namin. So despite the limited time and resources we had for the project, I found that the key informant interviews and cognitive interviews to be important in actually developing our survey questionnaire. Hindi lang siya nakatulong sa pag-identify ng right questions that can best surface the needs ng community organizations, but they also helped us in refining the questions to ensure that they are more authentic, relatable, and easier for the participants to understand. And also, I think one reflection I had with this study is that participating in research activities, like going through interviews, participating in the workshop, answering surveys, actually takes time away from participants to do other things. So ako bilang researcher, of course, I'm inclined to ask as many questions I want to know more about CLM, lalo na kapag may opportunity. I think this should be tempered by the realities of the participants, that they have other things going on with their lives, and I should only take as little of their time as possible. Also, for the self-administered online surveys, setting up as many channels as possible may help participants navigate the surveys and establish better relationships with them. So instead of just sending out links, tapos bahala na yung mga tao na magpakalat ng links, I think communicating with participants through their emails or Facebook pages allowed us to hear and listen to their concerns, which were not necessarily related to the research on hand. So may na-encounter ako na isang organization, medyo naglabas sila ng ilang concerns nila, not about our study, but actually about other things patungkol sa HIV response ng ating bansa. And I think yung value noong pagkakaroon din ng ganoong communication platform with them or opportunity for them to talk with us, researchers, ay napakahalaga kasi hindi lang naman mga researchers, I think, yung dapat nagde-decide kung ano yung pinag-uusapan sa particular study. So maganda rin na yung mga participants natin, they get to talk about other things important to them na not necessarily about our research questions or our research objectives. Also, validating survey results through a workshop helped clarify and enrich the discussion about some of the statistical results we obtained. And I think it's my first validation workshop na na-conduct. So, very grateful ako sa mga colleagues ko from Psych kasi very fun yung naging proseso at collective din yung naging proseso. And although I have read a lot about literature tungkol sa CLM, tapos member din ako ng ilang community organizations na LGBTQ+. Tapos halos 1 decade na rin ako nag-work patungkol sa nag-work with the communities. I think important pa rin na reminder sa akin, and siguro it's a struggle but it's always a a continuous not fight pero challenge din for me to always regard the participants as co-experts and co-constructors of new knowledge through research. Kasi I think for me, this not only helps in doing good research, but more importantly, it helps in doing research for good. Pag tinignan natin yung participants na hindi lamang sila passive people being engaged doon sa research, pero active yung role nila bilang mga experts din at kasama natin doon sa pag-construct ng knowledge. So these are my references. Pasensya na kung medyo napahaba. And thank you so much for listening to our presentation.
Ayan, so thank you very much to our speaker. Palakpakan po natin ulit siya sa masigabong clap reacts naman po. Pasensya na rin po kanina noon, sabi ko pala ay ladies and gentlemen. So dapat inclusive tayo dito. So everyone na lang po. Ayan, okay. So we're now opening the floor to those who have questions for our speaker. And I believe nandito rin po ang inyong co-authors. Tama, no, engineer?
Yes, nandito sila.
Yes, ayan. So kung meron po tayong questions sa kanila, we can accommodate around 2 to 3 questions po siguro. Okay, sige. So habang wala pa pong nag-message sa atin right now, pwede po tayo again mag-raise hand dito sa Zoom, or you can also message me personally or our speaker, si Sir Xavier, if you have questions and you would like to stay anonymous. Kung ayaw naman po natin or we're fine with everyone seeing it, we can send the chat then to everyone. Okay? So sige, ako na lang po muna siguro magtatanong. Since dun sa recent na NCS, National Convention on Statistics, meron release na community-based monitoring system. Ayan. So, ang question ko sana ay, is it possible to work with them? Kasi if I'm not mistaken, yung CBMS, ang idea niya ay localized din. Tama? For local government units. So, may chance ba or would it make sense to partner up with that para doon naman sa community-led monitoring?
I think may areas for collaboration between yung community-based saka yung community-led monitoring. But I think yung major difference nila is community-based monitoring is actually somehow like traditional monitoring and evaluation, pero done siya sa community level, kaya siya community-based. And I think yung major difference niya with community-led is actually the monitoring is decided and implemented by the communities themselves. So I think may areas for collaboration sa CBMS natin sa community-led monitoring. Pero meron pa ring unique sa community-led monitoring dahil nga yung mga important doon sa communities, sila yung magde-decide kung ano yung important at imo-monitor nila yung mga bagay na sa tingin nilang important for them. Yan.
Okay, sige. Thank you so much for that. Pero naisip ko lang kasi baka dahil meron sa results nakita na merong lack of equipment for some of the facilities, baka makatulong lang. Kaya naisip yung CBMS kasi meron sila na din na facilities. So ayun, but thank you very much for the clarification. Meron po ba tayong other questions for our speaker? Okay. Sige, I think may question dito. nagkaroon daw po ba ng problem doon sa pag-collect ng data, specifically doon sa mga non-response, and paano, again, kinuha daw yung information from them?
Ayun, medyo nahirapan kami gathering responses kasi medyo marami talaga yung 158 yung organizations, and of course busy din naman yung organizations natin with other work, 'di ba? So yung isang naging strategy namin para ma-minimize yung non-response ay una nag-engage kami ng someone from the community who helped us coordinate with the different organizations na na-identify namin. Tapos syempre ako bilang bahagi din naman ng community, kilala ko rin yung ibang mga organizations. So I was able to help connect yung aming coordinator doon sa mga organizations na kailangang kausapin. Tapos we also did follow up sa several platforms tulad ng nabanggit ko kanina. Pati Facebook page ng mga organizations, minessage namin para lang din ma-ensure na natanggap nila yung aming invitation. Kasi isang problem din na na-experience namin, not just here in the study, but for other things that we did working with community organizations. Minsan, nagbabago-bago yung email addresses or hindi updated yung email addresses. At mas active yung mga organizations sa social media, of course, to raise awareness or to promote yung kanilang mga activities and programs. So we decided na lumapit din sa mga organizations through social media kasi mas makikita namin sila doon.
Okay, thank you so much. And I think that's all the time we have. Meron lang daw comment dito. So thank you to Xavier and team. Comment na lang, hehe. Okay. I think the study would be a very good example for our survey operations students dito sa UP School of Statistics kasi meron tayong stat 143 for the graduating students and stat 250 for the Masters of Statistics students. So I think this would be a very good example, especially the part where different strategies like key informant interviews, sampled surveys, and validation workshops, or FGD, in the process of questionnaire design and validation of results. So ayun, baka din daw tayo mag-speaker o magturo ng SAT 140 next semester, diba?
Thank you doon sa comment. Sorry, Bea, meron lang ditong message. May tanong
Yes,
yung
please.
isang participant natin. Did you encounter issues related to social desirability or impression management doon sa pagkuha to feedback or data gathered from monitoring? Actually, pinag-usapan namin to nung research team kasi medyo mahaba nga yung unang survey namin, medyo mahaba. Tapos hindi naman siya straightforward kasi nagba-branch out yung mga questions. So pinag-isipan namin yun kung mas okay ba na meron tayong interviewer for the surveys, meron ba tayong enumerator. Pero yun nga, yung isang naging namin ay kung meron tayong enumerator for our survey, baka magkaroon ng issue tungkol sa social desirability kasi medyo particular yung mga tanong doon sa organizations, 'di ba? Kung nagagawa ba nila to or hindi. So we decided na gawin siyang self-administered. Tapos nag-set up kami ng Facebook page para kung meron silang tanong patungkol doon sa survey, matutulungan sila. Like yung mga issues naman generally ay mga technical issues like pwede bang balikan na lang yung survey kasi medyo mahaba siya. Mga 30 minutes yung inabot din ng participants and so on. So yun yung mga ways na ginawa namin para ma-address itong social desirability. Sige, sorry Bea, thank you.
No problem. Thank you so much for sharing your research with us and for answering the questions na ating participants. So unfortunately, that's all the time that we have to answer the questions. If ever, you may send your questions sa email ni Sir Xavier, tama po ba?
Yes, okay lang.
And 𝗘𝗶𝗶𝗿@up.edu.ph. Okay, and with that, you would like to present the certificate. So the certificate reads, the UP School of Statistics awards the Certificate of Appreciation to Engineer Xavier Louis J. Bilon for the excellent lecture on Capacitating Communities for Change, a national baseline study on community-led monitoring for HIV in the Philippines, as part of the UPSS Colloquium on the Statistical Sciences, given the 17th day of November 2022 via Zoom and signed by Dr. 𝗫𝘃𝗶𝗿𝗿, the Director for Research, and Dr. Joseph Ryan Lansangan, the Dean of the UP School of Statistics. So once again, isang masigabong clap-reacts naman po para sa ating speaker. Ayan. Maraming salamat po ulit. And we hope to see everyone at the next colloquium. The next one we have is on November 21 for the ADB, where the researchers of ADB will be reporting about the key indicators for Asia and the Pacific. So that would be on November 21 from 4:30 to 6 p.m. Muli, maraming salamat po at kita-kita po tayo sa susunod. Thank you! So, ito pong electronic certificates, ito po, paki-fill upan na lang yung URL na sinend sa atin sa chat so that we will be able to request for the certificates. And the certificates will be sent to your registered email address within 3 working days. So, for other feedback naman po, you would love to hear your feedback on how we can improve. You can send your inquiries or feedback to stat.upd.edu.ph. Okay? So we hope to see you, hindi lang po sa ating susunod na colloquium, but for the other upcoming events po ng School of Statistics. So you may also join the UP School of Statistics mailing list at bit.ly/UPStat mailing list. And you may also follow our Facebook page for the updates. Okay, again, maraming salamat po sa lahat.